Hello, and welcome to the Emotional Endurance Movement. This week's episode is dedicated to all of us living in increasingly suspicious times. What? That seems weird. What do you mean it's all connected? I mean, what? You know the one.
Oh, I know the one.
Hello, and welcome to the Emotional Endurance Movement, the only mental health variety show where we practice the skills that helped us stay regulated in a dysregulating world. I'm Lori Sharp-Page, your Chief Coping Officer and host, and with me today is our co-host, our behaviorist at large, and someone who willingly signed up to make 250 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches with middle schoolers. It's Crimson McDonald.
Howdy. And don't worry, Lori, you also are one of the few people that went to a chamber event and told me that it was one of the funnest days of your life.
It's true. It's true. I had a real good time at my local school summit. I also want to introduce you, our viewer at home, the one filling out the survey, the one practicing emotional endurance in their real life. You're the real one, and we're so glad you're here to join us for another great week. All right, Crimson, why don't you lead us into the insight of the week?
Thank you, Lori. So this week I picked a really fun quote, and our insight is coming from the prolific Ted Lasso. Be curious, not judgmental. And so the reason I chose this quote is because curiosity often gets mistaken for judgment. And I've always been someone who asks so many questions because I like to tear things apart and be critical and understand how it works. And I think it comes across as critical or judgmental versus genuine curiosity. So seeing suspicion as a form of judgment is, I think, common in our society because it's our brain's way of trying to decide someone's intent. And so being curious is an antidote to being suspicious. And I don't think it's judgmental. And we need to break that stereotype. What do you think, Lori?
I mean, I believe that judgment and suspicion go together really closely because ultimately both are trying to assess threat. And as we've talked about, threat is not only just physical, it can also be emotional, psychological, spiritual, relational. Like we could go on. Threat comes in a lot of different packages for our brain. And so I do think the default is when someone starts asking questions that the default is something around suspicion or judgment. That's what the person receiving it often feels. But I believe that there's a lot more room for us to really say that, part of how we can support each other is to be curious about things that we don't understand. And if we can come at those conversations from a less judgmental, a more engaged, more curious versus suspicious mindset, the research has shown we'll have better outcomes, right? We can build more empathy, we can build more understanding, we can increase our communication. But none of this happens without some of just the natural awkwardness that happens when we start talking about these things and dealing with these things. So I think you're right. We should be curious before judgmental. Judgmental, like suspicion, I feel like it's already rushing to the end. You've already got the answer in your brain and you're just looking to make that answer make sense versus curiosity is being open to what is this experience really about? What is the information underneath it? What are the layers here present? And how do I make meaning of this through really exposing myself to it versus picking and choosing evidence that supports my initial inclination, which is probably going to be just more negative because our brain, again, is trying to keep us, it's threat adverse. It's trying to keep us safe. So it will kind of fill in the blanks wherever it thinks it can, especially if that simplifies or keeps the story as the status quo.
I think if suspicion would be judgment and curiosity would replace it, it's kind of the same thing. Really, curiosity is opening the investigation, whereas judgment is closing the case, right? You've
Yeah.
made the assessment. I love this quote. I love Ted Lasso. I think it speaks to something really important. And it speaks to a generational difference, which is from millennial down are much more curious by nature, but we have to be. We've lived in a digital world. We've lived in a world where fact and fiction, the lines have blurred. And now with AI, this is becoming even more important. You should
A
be
relationship with
suspicious.
information is different. I think that's an important distinction. A big part of what we do with our company, Sprouting Change, and the thought leadership we're presenting is teaching people how to bridge that gap between trigger, which often happens in our bodies before our minds are even fully aware or impact it, to reaction, to try and build out that space, to build out your window of tolerance, to build out your ability to regulate yourself through stuff, the difficult circumstances, so that you just don't jump to the shortcut that is judgment, that is suspicion, which are emotions that can really stir up a lot of havoc in our relationships. And they have a role, they have a purpose. Judgment has a role, suspicion has a role, but we need to be mindful about how we engage with those things because our brain will often default to the worst case scenario.
My brain's a professional at it, so you can
Oh, my
ask
brain's
about
really
it
good at it
anytime.
too.
It's
Yeah.
really good.
Thank you, though. Thank you for bringing Ted Lasso to the
Yeah.
show.
I wanted it to
What's
be
up,
fun.
Ted?
What's up?
Now we're going to move on to our show and tell for this week, which is something suspicious, and Crimson is going to get us started.
Suspicion is a chronic feeling in today's society, given the chaos that we live in, AI, and not knowing truth from fiction. But I wanted to go back to a core fundamental, and it is the can we grab coffee text? Let's be real. This is one of the most annoying things you can see in your text inbox. So today I bring a story about how this completely dysregulated me in my own life. I got a text from my boss, and this was years ago, that said, "Hey, we need to meet in person." Immediately, all the alarms go off. Suspicion, totally dysregulated. Nothing's getting me off of it. I'm getting fired. I got a complaint. I replayed everything that we had talked about, everything that had led up to the moment. I went to the meeting after a full day of dysregulation. That was the day I got one of the largest raises of my professional career. Suspicion quickly writes a story and quickly tells our brain the worst case scenario in this specific situation. The world came back to say, you just wasted a whole day worried that you were losing your job. And really, this will be marked as your largest raise in your professional career. I think that it speaks to had I initiated some curiosity about what that could have been other than all the doom and gloom, it might have been a better day.
For sure. Do you still get triggered if someone says, "Can we grab coffee?"
I absolutely do. I hate it. Don't say it to me. In fact, I think anyone that's worked closely with me in professional settings and personal settings, they know this about me. And it will say, "Can we grab coffee? Nothing serious. I want to get your thoughts." It is always caveated in my life because people know I can't move on from this text. And I also, due to the diversity of my work life and social life and board work, I get so many texts that people know it's just like going to be right there. And I've read it and I'm going to be stressing about it. So I am lucky that very few people pull this one on me now because I will text back and say, if you tell me what it's about, like I'm not sitting in that discomfort. So
I was
yeah,
gonna say, it's funny. It's now, and we've been doing the emotional endurance movement long enough that like this is now we're calling back into earlier episodes about your trauma of people sending you, "Can we grab a coffee?"
total suspicion. But in this case, it was a perfect example of why you should not let suspicion run your life.
Absolutely. It's like you have a dot 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 yacht mixed all in there.
I honestly, when I was bringing this to the table, I almost threw in a dot 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 yacht because
You knew it was coming.
had I leveraged that coping skill, think of how different that day would have been.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, I decided
Mm-hmm.
to just spiral. I mean, I was so dramatic. I think I canceled all my meetings, like went and sat in an office alone. Totally dramatic. I was also very young, but that's no excuse. I could have been more regulated and I could have thought it could be the biggest raise in my life, but I didn't.
Yeah.
And yeah, the world taught me a lesson. What about you, Lori? Do you have a example of when suspicion came sneaking at you?
Yeah, I do. And you know about this one already because you've been part of my hijinks. So, about 8 to 10 months ago, I noticed something suspicious on I-75 in Ohio. And that was that they literally closed down all the rest areas up and down 75 at the same time to tear them down and rebuild them. And I thought this was quite curious for two reasons. Number one, my bladder. I utilize those rest areas. For them to close down that many at the same time was cruel and unusual, especially as I am a taxpayer, which brings me to point number two. As a taxpayer, I'm very curious, suspicious, trying to be curious. It's conflictual. Why? Why did they shut them all down at the same time? Why did they all need to be rebuilt at the same time? As I mentioned, because of my bladder, have spent a significant amount of time in those rest areas, and they were actually pretty nice. So why? Earlier this month, or late last month, Crimson and I took a little trip up and down I-75, and there is some content coming about this exploration and the information that I uncovered. But the whole thing to me has not really sat right. And if you paying attention, there's like a lot going on in Ohio right now, and all of it probably much more important than this rest area thing. But it just really makes me wonder. Ultimately, my whole experience with this suspicion, as you can tell, is still unresolved, is that I don't even feel empowered to know how to get these answers. And I feel like once again, Ohio is gaslighting me.
I witnessed it with you. There are several closed. And, unlike my story, what you did is you implemented curiosity as your coping skill. And so you were suspicious of what government would close all of them. Like, it seems like you would have like a staggered approach or a phased
And we're talking
approach.
like probably 200 plus miles of rest areas, at least. It may be more than that. You'll have to check out my content because
Yeah,
there's more.
the series is to
It's
come. But there was
coming. It's something. Look, I'm a mom of 2 kids. You understand that me and my bladder have a relationship, okay?
you weren't
I
alone.
make plans around my bladder. My bladder has let me down before. So these rest areas are an essential utility for me. And I know I'm not the only one. I'm obviously not the only mom on the road, but is this really, it's suspicious. But maybe
Suspicious.
it's not, because I told my husband and he was like, I actually think it would be cheaper to do them all at the same time. And I'm like, in what world?
Yeah, it's not. And it doesn't matter. It's still a public utility. It should have been thought out.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. So
Well, I cannot wait for the content to hit YouTube, and I can't wait to see the videos because you were committed, you were dedicated, your curiosity provoked you to channel that suspicion into investigative reporting that we are all looking forward to seeing.
yeah. And I
Mm.
remain steadfastly suspicious of all of it. And now it's time for our emotional weather report with Crimson, where she tells us what's in the air for our movement this week. What's up, Crimson?
Thank you, Lori. Well, let's see what is going on with our movement. As you know, our community is growing and we had more participants this week than ever. And we hope to unpack how our movement is doing. The first thing I asked was just give me one word that represents how you are feeling about your week. And if you look at this beautiful little word bubble, you can see that exhausted popped the most. Keep in mind, this is open ended, and we still had almost 1/3 of the movement use the word exhausted. So that's significant and it's worth taking note of because the other words that we see are mostly on the negative end: overwhelmed, frantic, ruminating. These are all signs of the dysregulation you'd expect if you are absolutely exhausted. So then we ask, is this exhaustion causing us to show up dysregulated? And unfortunately, look at that. 69% of our movement reported showing up dysregulated. 22% are showing up regulated, with another 8% that are showing up mixed, depending on the moment. What this says is that exhaustion, that overwhelm, and all of those feelings are catching up with us. And it doesn't mean there's a mental health crisis. It just means our capacity is depleted while the demands upon us are exceptional. Okay. Next, we asked our audience, where are you showing up dysregulated? Now, this is important because what we've typically seen is that the dysregulation we feel is showing up at work, but we're bringing it home with us. Now, this is not to shame anyone. It is okay. It is hard to draw a work-life balance, but showing up dysregulated at home, as we've talked about, dysregulation is infectious. So if you're dysregulated, your partner, your children, your family is going to feel that dysregulation too. Family dynamics popped again for the movement, along with finances. I think as long as we're seeing the cost of living be what it is, the home life, the family, the demands that we have, we're going to be struggling. It's okay to show up dysregulated. What it's about is really what we're going to do to stop showing up dysregulated at home or anywhere else. And that's where we asked our movement, how are you feeling? How much do you have in your cup? And the reality is that people are feeling pretty depleted. A third said they're completely empty, which is really just unfortunate because it is extremely hard to show up and consciously cope when all of your reserves are depleted. And that's why we need to talk about how we're going to fill up our tank, because we can't go into next week with this low of our reserves. Let's look at what the movement's using to fill their cups. When we look at what our movement is doing to fill their cups, they're out socializing, they're at home, hanging out, and vegging out. All of these are healthy ways to cope when you need to recharge. Unfortunately, what we're seeing based on us showing up dysregulated at home and based on our overall exhaustion and depletion is that we might want to challenge our coping skills, because this week we looked at, did it work? And when we asked everyone what you're doing to fill your cups, and then whether or not those made you feel better, the same, or worse, it seemed pretty ineffective. Less than 30% of people were using a coping skill that they felt were actually recharging them and filling up their cup. So hopefully here on the Emotional Endurance Movement, we can give you more skills and equip you to be better prepared for these types of dips in your hope, optimism, resilience, efficacy. It is difficult to show up regulated. It is difficult to keep our cups filled. And so the point of the movement is learning what coping skills are going to help you from being depleted. Which brings us to this week's advisory. When we asked what people look ahead and see the most pressure coming from, work, family, logistics, and financial hit hard. Now, I can tell you, I dug into who's actually filling out our survey, and we have a lot of people in that 30 to 45 range. So seeing logistics pop here was interesting because as a mom with a kid in middle school, logistics of life have gotten real in the month of March. And so if you're one of those people that are looking at next week feeling overwhelmed already, it's even more important that you're filling your cup appropriately and filling those reserves so you can go into next week prepared to show up regulated to work with your family, be ready to face financial challenges, and to get through the logistics of planning your life. So watch out for those things, fill your cup, and I'm going to leave you with a challenge. So next week, I want you to get suspicious about a habit. Why do you do it on autopilot? Get curious as to what habits are you doing just because you do them. You don't even think about it. It is a thoughtless thing that you do repetitively, and really question yourself about it and get curious about why you do it and see if it's still really something you need or if it's just something that's been built into the system.
Well, you mentioned logistics, and mine is tangentially related. to logistics, but I just want to say it is spring and I feel the pressure of the logistics and the logistics of the summer already creeping into my peripheral, which is interesting because we were just under snow not too long ago. But the restorative thing I did with zero productivity attached to it is I listened to the birds. I just listened to the birds. I spent like 20 minutes just laying down, just listening to them, tweeting and twatting and all the things. Interesting fun fact about the nervous system of birds. Birds are unable to sing their call song if their nervous systems are not regulated. So it can be very regulating to be around birds because the birds are regulated if they're singing. I think squawking is obviously that's probably a more reactive skill set. But
Yeah.
that's what
I
I did.
mean, that's awesome. I mean, it's again, all of these things are always so basic and so small, but they're
Hmm.
meaningful. They make a difference. I mean, having kids makes you stop and smell the flowers, like quite literally, while you're on
Hmm.
the way to school and they're late and you have 50,000 things to do. But I did the challenge also. I actually did a TikTok about it because I couldn't believe I could do it. Mine was simple. I just went to TJ Maxx with no agenda and I left with nothing. So not only did I just walk around and meander and do nothing, but it didn't come with a financial cost to my coping skill. So I was very proud of myself. I intentionally just let myself do nothing for an hour and I chose to meander TJ Maxx and I didn't even pay the cost for it.
Well, thank you so much for this week's emotional weather report. And now it's time for this week's feeling of the week suspicion. Our feeling of the week is suspicion. Suspicion is honestly a protective emotion. It shows up when things feel uncertain, unclear, or slightly off. Your brain's essentially saying, pause, something here might not be safe. And from a survival standpoint, that's actually very useful. In fact, most of us can probably tell a story about sometime we were rightfully suspicious of something. So, this is not about turning off suspicion. It's about understanding its role. Because the problem is that suspicion is designed to activate quickly, it gets you reactive. But it doesn't always deactivate easily when there's evidence to show that there's no need for it. A lot of times it'll fill the gaps in our stories, and they might not always be true. We start mind reading, making assumptions, building entire narratives with very little information because suspicion just sat wrong. That's when suspicion takes control, and it can honestly be surprisingly convincing. And then your brain is geared up to collect evidence, but not necessarily accurate evidence just to support the point that you've already landed on. So the question becomes, how do we interrupt suspicion before it turns into judgment? Which brings us to, how do we interrupt suspicion in such a way so that it doesn't overgrow and make us ultimately suspicious of our lives and those around us? Well, the best way, honestly, is just to interact with it. Allow it to be an emotion. Don't judge it, but understand that if it sticks around too long, it's going to do more harm than good for you. And if you need a way to help move it along, we're going to talk about more ways when we talk about the antidote to suspicion, which is curiosity. Just allowing that emotion to exist in a different state can help you shift through it and recover from it in a way that doesn't leave you completely depleted, overwhelmed, angry, and lost in the abyss of it all, but instead says, okay, this is here. What can I learn from it? And that's all from this week's feeling of the week suspicion.
This week, we're going to play immediately suspicious, or as any middle schooler would call it, sus. All right, so we're going to get out our favorite tool as of late, and the picker wheel is going to give us a prompt, and it is up to us to decide if it's sus or if we just need to chill. Are you ready for this?
Oh, I'm so ready. Let's go.
Okay. And then for audience or people listening, Lori and I both have a board that says suspicious or chill. And so we're going to respond at the same time, see if we would have the same reaction. Okay. Are you ready? Let's
Yeah.
spin the sucker. A kid being too quiet in the other room.
Sus. A
Sus,
million times
sus.
sus. Don't even have to think about it. Sus.
I mean,
Done.
let's just spin again. No discussion.
Yeah,
Discussion.
no duh.
No duh. Let's spin again. Sus, sus,
I'm gonna
sus,
actually
sus,
say
sus.
chill. I'm gonna say chill.
And
I'm
there's
gonna
a
say chill.
fundamental difference between the coping queen and her anxious buddy. Right here.
To be fair, I've really had to work at this one. This one is a feather in my cap because of how much dang work I've had to put into just being like, cool. What do
I'm
you want to talk about?
the world is, I mean, my show and tell was a perfect example of why I should not do this, but
There's the whole
no.
lore. We're gonna have to make a whole playlist called Crimson Can We Talk?
Oh, and just know, whole world, you send me that text, can we talk? And the answer is not until you clarify what about. And so no, we cannot talk until I know what we be talking about. All right, but let's hit another one. These are kind of fun. A coworker suddenly being very nice.
Chill. That's chill.
Younger me, I would have been totally sus.
See, yeah, so you
Older.
worked on this one
Mhm.
too.
Yeah, I'd been
Yep.
like, what do they want out of me? And they probably still want something out of me, but I would feel like I know how to protect myself. I wouldn't care. Should we do another?
Oh, I mean,
Okay, unpack yours
Mhm.
first. Yeah, total chill.
No, man.
So why
No.
why?
We have now crossed lines
Yeah, why? Why suspicious?
because it's passive aggressive. It's like the most passive aggressive you could do in an email. And you know why I'm so sus about it? I'll be honest. I'll call myself out. I'm so honest about it because you know who does this? I do. And I only pull this out when it really needs to be pulled out. So if you really need to pull it out on me, okay, I can accept it. But like this is per my last email this is like we are about ready to throw hands.
So this is the difference of how we show with regulation and not. So per my last email, that to me is so passive aggressive that is laughable. And so you've immediately lost the battle with me.
Well,
Okay.
then I guess I have some work to do.
Well, I'm very grateful as your business partner that I have not gotten the per your last email or per my last email. And I will be cautious of using those statements. But
Yeah, if you get that from me, please note that our email communications will be ending as soon as we are no longer. Because I mean, honestly, the reason I use it is sometimes people really do not listen, they do not read. And when you have to redirect somebody like that, it's like, oh
yeah,
gosh, this is like a lot. Yeah. So
agreed.
maybe a little unhinged, but it's my honest response.
All right, one more. Let's see if we
All
end it with
right.
agreement. A stranger who's overly enthusiastic about a great opportunity. I feel like you're cheating.
I am like so conflicted right now. All right. So I'm unfortunately going to have to say sus. I would like to say chill. I really would like to say chill.
Yeah, but right?
Yeah.
I mean, what more can you say other
Yeah.
than
I think the reason I want to say chill about this so much is I think that this is a wisdom thing. Like, just the longer you live on the earth, the more you're like anybody who's got like a great opportunity, you're like, hmm.
yeah.
But it's tough because truly great opportunities sometimes do. We both have stories. We shared some last week
Yeah.
about moments when we got hooked in with people and communities. So, like, it's hard. But I think just being real, and I don't think I'm the only one in this one, like,
Yeah.
I kind of have my guard up.
I'm with you. I think that's just an
Yeah.
unfortunate reality. Well, that was a fun game.
So fun.
We're pretty much on the same page, but we have very different triggers.
We have definitely some compare and contrast going on.
Yeah, I know for sure.
And now it's time for a word from our skill of the week, curiosity. Our skill of the week is curiosity. And curiosity is one of the most powerful antidotes to suspicion. And it's truly a skill that is important throughout our life. The thing with suspicion is it tries to close the story, but curiosity can open it. Suspicion says, I know what's happening here. Curiosity says, wait, what else could be happening here? Curiosity creates space to ask questions, space to gather information, space just not to know. And most importantly, space to slow the emotional reaction so that your thinking brain and your full experience can show up in a responsive versus reactive way. Now, please know this doesn't mean ignoring your instincts. Suspicion is as important and it does keep us safe. You should listen to it. But you should be aware of how much space it takes up in your life and utilize curiosity as a way to help you move through it instead of just let it overgrow everything. It asks you to ask questions instead of filling in the blanks, and it asks you to sit in the humbleness of the fact that there's so much going on. It can be hard to know where anything really lands. Curiosity is the key to unlocking a state of being with your emotions where you can allow them to be, control them less, and find yourself at more ease while experiencing them. That's all for this week's skill of the week, curiosity.
This week, since we're talking about suspicion and curiosity, we're going to talk about going down the rabbit hole because that is such an easy thing to do. And while we both could bring stories of going down the rabbit hole, it's curiosity that drives us. It's part of our brand. But this one's fun because this is one that we kind of went down together. So a few
Yeah.
weeks ago, a big thing happened in the global system, which is the Epstein files dropped. We're not going to unpack a lot of that because this is not the place or time, but there's lots to unpack there. But one of the things that we did not suspect to see come out of it was that Life Touch. Now, for those that don't know, Life Touch is a photo company, but they are pretty much running a monopoly on all schools' photography. So
I
yearbooks.
think it's something like over 90%. They take over 90% of the school pictures
I
in the
mean, I
US.
think I saw a stat. It's 25 million kids a year that they're photographing.
Mhm.
So Life Touch, or the conglomerate that owns Life Touch, was in the Epstein files. Now, Life Touch itself was not mentioned in the files, but the owner was.
Okay. So I was aware of that information and it was in my head because my kids got their pictures taken from Life Touch this year. And I was thinking erroneously, I was like, well, that concerns me that that these are going to be the people doing the pictures next year. And that's also a problem for next school year, Lori. So I'm not going to worry about it too much. And then about a week ago, my kids came home and they both told me the same thing. And at first, I kind of like tried to talk them out of it because I was like, that can't be right because of my own resistance and fear in this area, which was another interesting thing. But basically, they came home and told me that they had their pictures taken that day. Now, we hadn't got them ready for anything, they weren't ready for picture day. I didn't sign a form or consent to them doing a spring picture day. And apparently what they did is they took pictures with all their classmates, which makes sense. That makes sense in the spring. But then they both told me that they individually also took pictures. And then I was like, well, I don't like any of that. And also, I wasn't due to deal with that problem until next year, which is next school year. I know that that is a very privileged statement. I'm unpacking that with myself. But that's where I was at. I was like pretty shocked. So then I'm like, well, I need to talk to somebody about this because I have feelings of suspicion, all right, around all this. So I go and I talk to my husband and I tell him this whole thing. And I say exactly what I'm saying to you all today. And I'm like painting this whole picture. And he just looks at me and he goes, I'm not worried about it. Okay. Which is, I mean, that's a choice to say to someone after they just spent 2 minutes telling you what they were worried about. But okay. All right. And then we were interrupted and the conversation didn't go further. And maybe that's for the best. So then I'm thinking I need to use another coping skill, right? So I reach out to Crimson and I'm like, Crimson, this happened and I don't know what to feel about it. And I just like feel really conflicted. And like, what does this mean? And like, this was a problem for next school year, Lori. And like, what am I doing? And then Crimson regales me with the tale you are about to hear, which totally cracked my mind open and led to me wearing a 10 hat this week on the show. All right, continue.
Well, and this is where the rabbit hole begins because So I am highly engaged in my PTO. Other schools call them PTAs. Same thing, parent teacher organization. I've been on the board of every PTO that my kids are in school of. I think it's very important. Highly advocate for people to get involved with their PTO. But years ago, we had decided to move away from Life Touch. Now, not because of the $150 million the owner had paid Epstein post him being a criminal, well, a sexual assaulting criminal. But anyhow, it was for other reasons, efficiency, cost, and other things. So this news breaks, and I'm like, ha, ha, ha. Guess what I did? I voted to get off Life Touch. My kids, they've been using a different company. We have Jostens, and we've been using them. We've been happy. It's a little bit more expensive, better quality. And I just sat on my high horse for about the 6 minutes between that and me being like, who is Jostens? To only find out Life Touch. Now, to be clear, Jostens broke off and only their school program is owned by Life Touch. Specifically, Life Touch only bought the school program, which is like another red flag of suspicion. Yeah. Interesting, right? That's our rabbit
It is
hole.
interesting. And I also want to bring to the table, look, there's a lot to unpack here. And as Crimson said, we know what we are. We know our place in this wild world, and that is to help you learn how to cope with it. But it's strange. And I want to say, I think the remedy for this is to have local photographers, local small businesses do these things. I know that's a big ask. I do believe that there's some programs out there, but I mean, schools are already so stretched. Like asking them to do some type of community level coordination like that with the budgets that they have is probably not realistic. But wouldn't that be so much better than having options that are owned by the same conglomerate that seems to be in the mix, at best, in the mix in some
$150
questionable dealings?
million in the
I mean,
mix.
that's like gross. So we went down this rabbit hole together. I think the solution is some level of local activation on that. And I know that's a tall order. Like, I just know it's a tall order.
It is.
And also, step one, I guess, is talking about it. I'm glad I brought it to you and I heard the whole story. I'm glad I didn't just let my husband's lack of concern shut me down because I learned so much more. And I do think, as somebody who is trying to be more active in my community, I would like to know more about how they choose their vendors for school photographs and maybe be the one to say, could we do something local? If only to be a dissenting voice.
Well, that's why I highly advocate everyone join their local PTO or PTA. And that's where, I mean, these decisions are pretty easy to make. It's usually a small board of people that are just trying to do their best in their free time. So get involved because it's great to do local. I hope to bring that to my board. I'm on the board. I'm bringing it with some ideas about how to execute and not just the problem. So that would be my
Yeah.
advice for
Well,
those.
maybe we'll be able to talk about this more in the future.
Yeah.
That's all for this week's episode of the Emotional Endurance Movement. If today made you notice how quickly suspicion can take hold in your life and how powerful curiosity can be in slowing that down, then awesome. We have done our job. Before you scroll away, make sure to like, follow, and subscribe so you don't miss next week's episode. And make sure you take our survey so you can be part of the show. We really do want to build this community around how people are taking care of themselves in these really interesting times. We'll see you next week on the Emotional Endurance Movement. You bring the feelings.
And we'll bring the games. Peace out.
Bye.